Good morning, everyone. My name is Emma Cortina. Thank you for joining me on today's Exago Support Lab. Before we get started, as usual, if you guys could just let me know that you can hear me using your GoToWebinar questions pane, just so I know that I'm coming through loud and clear, everybody can hear me okay and see my screen. Awesome. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you for that. And again, welcome. My name is Emma Cortina, and we are going to get started with today's support lab. The topic of today's lab is dashboard filter SQL updates that we made in version 2021.1, the most recent version of Exago BI as of the delivery of this lab. So I'm going to start with a quick overview of today's lab. Just as always, you have a questions pane in your GoToWebinar control panel. Please feel free to use it for any questions or comments throughout the lab. I do have a few colleagues here with me. They'll be monitoring it as we go. And I'll take a couple breaks throughout the presentation to just make sure that we're covering all those questions and everyone's following along. All right, so today's lab is going to be pretty quick. A little overview. We're going to spend today talking about one of the exciting enhancements to roll out in, again, version 2021.1. And these are updates specific to dashboards. Now, there are a few areas that you should notice differences. So we're going to break down the experience to explain where the changes have relevance. You should notice UI and UX differences in the designer. And then there were additional changes made to how we execute dashboards as well that we're going to talk about after that. All right, so let's begin by talking about the designer changes. In previous Exago versions, the behavior when opening a dashboard, excuse me, in the designer is to execute all of the advanced reports or express view reports on the canvas, even in design. This allows the individual working in the designer to know what they're working with, but in some cases it would incur an amount of latency if the reports were largely unfiltered or include a significant amount of in-memory processing. Some of the largest culprits of this are reports with top or bottom end filtering, sorting by aggregate, large formulas that cannot be pushed to SQL for one reason or another, or other long-running reports, right? There's a few different scenarios that could have implications here. We've made changes in 2021.1 to show tile previews in the designer instead of running the report, with an indicator that lets the user know if the tiles are up to date or require a refresh to show real values. So I'm going to open up the designer of a dashboard that I've built locally to talk about how this works. Let's take a look ourselves. All right. So I have this efficiency dashboard here, and before we run it, we're going to open it up in the designer. The efficiency dashboard was built with a variety of reports and dashboard visualizations. And when I open this right off the bat, you'll notice a difference immediately. None of our reports have loaded or executed, and we're seeing this preview image on all of those tiles. Rather than showing an example with dummy data of the chart type, for example, we've elected to show this placeholder image, which makes it abundantly clear to the user that this is not a report execution. We want to eliminate any confusion there, but an image holding the tile space. We also have this small blue icon in the top right of each tile, right over the refresh button, excuse me, which is indicating to me that this dashboard tile needs to be refreshed in order to display live data. So we will see this blue indicator pop up if we make a change to the tile in design, indicating that we should refresh to see that change reflected in the designer. Now there's also a global refresh icon in the top toolbar of the entire dashboard, and this can be used to reload all of the tiles at once. Now this is not going to execute the filters, it's not going to make the tiles interactive as on output, we're not actually running the dashboard, it's just the ability to see and design the reports on the dashboard in the legacy view if you would prefer. And again, that's with executions for most of those tiles, advanced reports or express views. Now you'll notice that I've actually designed this dashboard with tile headers. And just in case you're not familiar, a tile header is available on each tile type, including things like filters. It's used, or rather its input is right at the top of each tile's pane here. I can use the eyeball to actually show that on output. The reason I point these out here is that I've actually used these as sort of labels for my reports, so that without refreshing this dashboard in design, I still have an understanding of what these reports are representing. I still know what I'm working with. Additionally, for any visualizations that were built right on the dashboard, so you'll see these 3 KPIs along the top, those were built right on the dashboard. They are not other report types. You will see a preview of the chart type here. Of course, they're not real values. Their labels are placeholders, and they show the little blue dot indicating as much. Now I'm going to start by reloading the whole dashboard to show what that looks like. These tiles are simply going to load as you'd expect, as you're all used to the legacy behavior. We have labels for our KPIs now showing the type of aggregation, right? So we know that we've actually grabbed the configuration for these titles. I've assigned these labels in design, and we've also queried for those values. These reports are not particularly long running, so I'm not going to see a significantly impactful delay in load time here. Of course, if I were working with reports that do take a little longer to execute, especially if they're largely unfiltered in the design specifically, I might refresh only the reports that I need to work with using their little individual refresh icons. Now, if I make any changes to these tiles, the blue icon is going to reappear both on the report tile and in the dashboard toolbar. And this is indicating to me that the display is not up to the most recent version of the report, and then, of course, that the entire dashboard execution is not fully up to date. For example, I have a filter controlling the report in the bottom left here. So I'm going to go ahead and show what a change looks like. If I remove this filter, and first let's take a peek what we have, right? So we have one filter that is on my dashboard controlling all of the reports, another controlling all of the reports. The one I'm talking about now is this category name filter, and it applies only to the bottom left report. You can see it has a default value of these 4 values, and when we refreshed my dashboard, we loaded this report with that filter applied. If I delete this filter, we'll see the refresh icon appear both on the report and on the dashboard. If I refresh the report, the dashboard button goes away as well, because now the entire dashboard is up to date. And I can add that filter back. Now I'd like to be explicit about the behavior here. I can configure the filter. Nothing's going to change yet. Give it default values. We'll select the same 4 default values. I can save and close this, and I'm still not going to see a refresh icon on any of the tiles or the dashboard because this filter is not applied to anything. So I just want to be explicit about the type of changes that actually trigger that refresh icon. Something needs to change about our tiles, about the display of the report, to actually trigger that refresh. As far as Exago is concerned, this dashboard is still up to date because this filter is not applied to any of our reports. I'll go ahead and select this report again, and we'll see the refresh icon appear on both the report and the dashboard. All right, so at this point, I'm going to check for any questions, make sure that we're all covered. Again, I do have a couple colleagues here looking at questions, so unless they're appropriate for the entire group, I'm going to go ahead and let them handle those. All right, and let's go ahead and move on to the second set of changes here. These are a little bit more transparent to the end user, but they are equally exciting. There's potential for performance gain with the use of this enhancement. So although it is transparent to the end user, if applied correctly, it hopefully prevents latency in dashboard execution, which of course is anything but transparent. I'm going to hop back to the deck to start discussing this part. Okay. So we've introduced a configuration flag on each data object in the admin console called interactive filtering in database. When this setting is true, dashboards incorporating interactive filters will filter in the data source instead of in memory, which can reduce execution time and reduce the number of calls to the data source. When false, the feature is disabled. Dashboards will do all filtering in memory. Exago will first need to read the filter values by executing the tile and then re-execute the tile with the filter applied. This is the pre-version 2021 behavior. The default value for this flag is true. Now, just to explain a little bit about what this setting means, we're no longer doing double executions for each tile on the dashboard. Instead of running the reports against the database and then re-executing with the filter applied, we send the filter SQL to the database in that initial report execution. So to illustrate this change, I took the liberty of running the dashboard ahead of time, and I grabbed the SQL generated for these filters. Now let's go back to the dashboard just to talk about what we have on this dashboard and what we're going to be looking at. So quick refresher, we have 3 interactive filters on this dashboard. One is the employee last name, and I'm going to give it a default value of Buchanan for this example. This filter affects all of the tiles on my dashboard, all of the reports. We also have the category name filter. It is also an interactive filter. It only affects 1 tile on the report, and it has a default value of 4 of those categories. The third filter is an interactive filter on the year of the order date, and this is currently still going to be handled in memory. This enhancement does not yet cover formula interactive filters. So I'm going to walk through 3 scenarios of where filter SQL will be pushed to the database. And again, those will center around this employee filter and the category name filter. All right. Oops, sorry about that. The first scenario here is the filter value generation. So this is the actual category name filter. Data field, of course, is category name. Like we've said, the default values are the first 4 values in the category name dropdown. Excuse me. So this is where we're querying the database for the list of filter values to populate the interactive filter with. You'll see that this is a select statement. This is its own filter statement, where the rest of the examples I'm going to be showing you are simply where clause modifications as they apply to report executions. So this is the first step, right? We execute the filter SQL to get those values. Now, again, in that first execution, right? So scenario 2 is a report execution with default values. We've still not interacted with a filter on the output specific to the default value, the first execution. This report that we're looking at is the days to ship per category, which, if you recall, is the bottom left report on my dashboard that has both the employee last name filter as well as the category name filter applied to it. In this scenario, I have separated the default values for the 2 filters with a semicolon. So we have the last name filter, default value Buchanan, category name filter, same default values. Now, this is only a partial SQL snippet from the report execution. I grabbed it from the log, but the SQL for this report is a little lengthy, so I just wanted to focus on the specific relevant part to this lab. We've included this where clause in the initial execution of this report, so we only execute it once. We grab those filter values, and the single and first execution of the report will be filtered appropriately. Now, scenario 3 is a user interaction with the interactive filter. So in this case, we're going to mimic a user interacting with this. I'm going to go ahead and run this. Great, we get all our default values. Now let's say I decide after the fact that I would like to see Callahan's information as well. So I can go ahead and interact with it. This is generating new SQL. So if we go back to scenario 3, interaction with filters, this time we're looking at that report in the upper right. The only filter applied to it is the last name filter. We now have 2 selected values, Buchanan, which is the default, and Callahan. That report will be re-executed against the database, and it's going to include a where clause looking for Buchanan and Callahan as matching employee last names. All right, so those are our 3 major scenarios that this change has affected. I do want to just discuss a few exceptions, and of course these are documented on our support site. They are fairly case by case though. In certain circumstances, where you might be using stored procedures, database functions, custom SQL objects, or views that specifically those that take a long time to execute. It might be desirable to disable this setting for an individual data object. The feature should not be disabled in general for those types of objects. So this is not to say that if you're using stored procedures, automatically disable this setting. They may perform well when collecting filter values or other limited sets of data, and as such, you should evaluate your use cases individually. A few examples here down at the bottom of specific exceptions where we would recommend setting this interactive filtering to database to false on the data object level is an object, potentially a custom SQL object, that creates a lot of internal joins in the database and requires substantial amounts of memory or time to execute. Or imagine a custom SQL object where their performance is not really affected in any significant way by the presence of hard filters. In these circumstances, it's probably recommended to set this to false, but again, we really want you to take this case by case and find what works best for you. Yeah. All right. So today's lab is a fairly quick one. That rounds out the content that we had prepared. Of course, I will hop back to the questions pane and make sure that we've got everything covered, but I'm sure my colleagues are on top of them. I also wanted to let you guys know we're actually going to be taking a hiatus from the labs for just a bit to work on some other content that I'm really excited to bring you all. We will release an update when and if the labs are returning, and as always, we appreciate any feedback that you might have for us in the post-lab survey. That'll be all for today. We'll hang around for a minute and just make sure the questions pane is all set. But thank you again for joining me, and as always, happy reporting, everyone.
Hey, Emma, a great question came in just a second ago on dashboards being updated to allow the export of the dashboard as a whole instead of using chain reports. To speak to that, if you want, I can just answer that question for you, or do you want to speak to that as an upcoming feature?
No, go ahead, Travis. I'm happy to have you help.
So I'm glad to say that that is actually on our roadmap for our 2020.1.2 release that's slated for later this summer. We're calling that feature Dashboard Snapshots. So an upcoming addition to the dashboard capabilities is going to be exporting to a PDF, but instead of having it utilize the same logic as chain reports, it'll showcase the dashboard as it looks in our HTML viewer there.